It's Tuesday, July 8th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And I always say it is a hell of a day to talk ball because it is every day of the year, of the calendar. It's always a hell of a day to talk ball, but it is especially a hell of a day here on this particular podcast because joining me to make his Yahoo Fantasy Forecast debut is Justin Boone. Justin, what's going on, buddy?
Man, this is exciting. It seems weird to say finally because I haven't been at Yahoo that long, but I think I had this like foolish impression that day one I was going to show up. I was going to put up my rankings. I was going to write an article. I was going to get a microphone thrown in front of me and away we go. Of course, that's not how it works, but I haven't been the new guy in a long time. My last job, I was there for 12 years. So this has been a bit of a different experience, but it's been super fun, man. Like, I know, it was 2 weeks ago, you and I got to sit down and I thought the conversation would be like, 15 minutes, maybe a half hour. We talked for well over an hour. It wasn't about fantasy at all. We were just talking about family and career and life and all that sort of stuff. And I've had so many of those awesome conversations here over the last month or so. So it's a very, very exciting time for me. And I'm pumped to be here, man.
Yeah, I'm absolutely so excited to have Boone, not just here at Yahoo, but especially here on the podcast. And yeah, both you and I have been ready to have you on this show for a minute. We had some, technical things, some behind the scenes stuff from literally a technical and international shipping issues to get Boone all of his equipment. It was quite a scene there, but we got it all done. We've got you on the pod. For the people who don't know Justin Boone's work, you can tell just by the fact that he said he was ready to go on his first day, just immediately dive into work. This guy's a grinder. He works hard. He's going to bring a ton to the show. But for the people that aren't familiar with you, Boone, tell them about your background, just sort of how you got to this point. Like you said, 12 years at your last job. Give the people the rundown real quick just on who you are and what they can expect from you.
Well, we were laughing before the show that this is sort of like a mini Backyard Banter episode, your old show from back in the day.
Deep cut, baby.
Exactly. So for me, I grew up in Niagara Falls. I'm going to give the very quick version here, but I grew up in Niagara Falls. I was young and impressionable at the time when the Bills were going to the Super Bowl every single year and somehow losing. I didn't know that it was going to involve 20 years of them being pretty bad after that before they got good again. But I am a Bills fan, full disclosure on that one. And yeah, career-wise, I just feel like I've been so lucky. Coming out of school, I got a job right away in football, and I've been in football ever since. My very first job, I got an internship with the Hamilton Tiger Cats in the CFL, the Canadian Football League. I think everybody knows what that is, even though it's not nearly as popular as the NFL. But man, what a cool job that was. The first time out, that's the one that I feel like I reference still to this day because I was embedded with the team. I got to see exactly how everything worked, how players approach different points in the season, how coaches dealt with the media, how the front office, some of the quotes that come out, and then you hear what they say right after they tell everybody that. You're like, wait a minute, that's not what you believe at all. And so now I feel like I have a pretty good BS detector when we hear some of these quotes come out. I can kind of, filter through and read between the lines on it. So it was a very cool first job to be, a week or two out of school and standing on the sidelines at practice and getting to have that learning experience. After that, I went to TSN, which is like Canadian ESPN. Just picture ESPN, except hockey leads every single time. And then it's NFL and then NBA and everything else. And after that, I went to the Score. And it was 12 years at the Score. The first 5 or 6 years were me being the NFL supervisor, and I was doing all my fantasy work kind of over and above that, after hours and stuff. And I started to have quite a bit of success with that. And then they put me in the full-time fantasy role. And I feel like that's when my career really took off. I was competing in the Fantasy Pros contest before that. I think everybody probably knows the Fantasy Pros Most Accurate Expert contest. I joined that a long time ago. The first season, it was just to see how I would do against some of the other analysts. I finished 8th out of 140, 150. And I'm a very competitive person. Everybody will learn that over time. And as soon as that happened, I was like, wait a minute. I think I can win this thing. Took me a little longer than I expected. Took me quite a few years, but eventually I did win it all in 2019. My last 7 years in it, I was in the top 7 every single time. My last 4 years in it, I was in the top 5 every time. And I mean, there's pros and cons to those accuracy contests, but I think it kind of gave me some credibility in the industry, and it kind of turned people on to my work. And from that point on, it's just been, it's been gravy, and it's been me trying to refine and improve my process. I mean, you're probably the same with your work and reception perception, all that. Every off season, it's going through trying to figure out, okay, where can I get better? What mistakes did I make last year? And now, being full-time fantasy for the last 7 or 8 years, it's allowed me to do that and to really get that much better at stuff. So that's led me now to Yahoo, where couldn't be more pumped to be here and to join everyone. I mean, my rankings are going to come out this week, my solo pages for all my rankings, my dynasty trade value charts. I know people have been asking for an update on that. This is probably the longest I've gone not updating those. So be really exciting to get those out this week as well. And then joining you on the podcast here, which it sounds like is going to happen quite a bit.
Yeah, no doubt, man. If you weren't fired up before, you should absolutely be fired up here and all the great stuff that Justin's going to bring to the table. A lot of content, a lot of diverse content as well. If you're watching on YouTube, you see the hardware behind him. The guy is it's super accurate ranker, and you and I have talked about that about like the differences in our approach in that way. So that's what I love about this show is not just like two people going back and forth agreeing with each other. It's like different perspectives about the game and everything. And I think Justin's going to bring a great one. And as Justin mentioned, he's going to be around for a ton of our August content, our in-season podcast content, and we will get more into that on the road. But let's waste no more time. Let's get into the meat of the show here. And I almost feel a little bit bad for you, buddy, that your first episode is kind of a weird one, because I had this idea to run a little mini series here before training camps open up called Contrarian Corner. Basically, we're going to try to poke holes at the consensus, maybe group think into the 2025 fantasy season. Really what I want to do here is just kind of play a little bit of devil's advocate before we get into the heart of fantasy draft season. It's kind of a little bit maybe of take shopping, if you will, but really I do think it is important to analyze situations in the lens of how things can go wrong, because in my personal opinion, and I know I'm bad about this too, we way too often just view things in one lens, just from the positive perspective. Like, here's what can happen if this goes really right. And then when things go very, very wrong in the regular season, we're kind of left scrambling, because we have no prior
nobody wants
base
to bet
built.
the under, right? Nobody wants to bet the under. You want to always bet the over.
Nobody wants to bet the under, but guess what? Most things don't go to plan. Most things don't go well. And so again, then we get to the in season, we're like, oh, this is not what we expected. Like, what do we do? So to kick things off here, this little mini series, I wanted to focus on 3 offenses, but particularly one that just lost their play calling offensive coordinators to head coaching jobs, and essentially ask the question for the team that we're going to start with: what if Ben Johnson leaving and the overall coaching brain drain actually does begin to have a massive negative impact on the efficiency of the Lions offense? Because we'll talk about here in a second, Boone, like nobody is viewing it that way based on rankings right now.
Well, you said you feel bad that this is my first episode and this is the topic here, but I was super pumped when you brought this topic up, because the team here, the Lions that we're starting with, this is something I had been thinking about well before you suggested this as the topic. So I really wanted to jump on and go through this. And I think everybody's talked about the Ben Johnson thing all off season long. So yes, that is going to be massive. I mean, him leaving, whenever you lose one of the best offensive coordinators, it's going to be a problem. I think maybe one that they could overcome if it was just that by itself. But I think there are so many things going on in this Lions franchise right now that could be a problem fantasy-wise. And I always want to make the distinction between like real life and fantasy, that they're definitely, sometimes people are too focused on one or the other. You kind of got to blend them both a little bit. And sometimes they are completely separate. You could have, a terrible real life scenario and yet still be putting up really good fantasy stats. The Lions are still going to be a good team. I don't think we're suggesting that today, that they're going to completely fall off and finish near the bottom of the league or anything like that. They are still going to be a good team. But you're losing Ben Johnson, who has really made that offense one of the best offenses in the league. They have the talent. They had the coordinator. Now he's gone. And Maybe John Morton is going to be able to step in there and take over. I think there's going to be a bit of a step back with him. But to me, it's all the factors involved. It's losing their all-pro center in Frank Ragnow to retirement. That happened more recently. But on top of that, they also lost Kevin Zeitler, right? Who's been a quality lineman for years, who has been a really good guard, played excellent for them last year. A Pro Football Focus, they ranked him, they graded him out as their third best guard last season. That's a huge loss. For the record, Frank Ragnow, I think, was the second graded center by them. So these are top linemen. So now you're going to have a situation in the interior of that offensive line where you're going to have at least two new starters. Maybe Graham Glasgow is going to move to center. We'll see what happens there. But you have an offense that has really been able to kill people with the run and really done it thanks to that offensive line. That's been a huge help for them. And that offensive line has also kind of insulated Jared Goff. And I think Jared Goff is the kind of quarterback that needs that kind of perfect scenario around him in order to hit his ceiling. And he had it. He had the coordinator. He had the line. He had the talent. Well, now we have questions about the line. Now we have questions about the coordinator. I'm going to stop there because I have a few other things I want to bring up, but I'm going to give you a chance to hit on those two first, because those are really, really big ones that are going to have an impact on these guys.
Well, I thought you made a really good point there about how there's a difference between having a good real life season and a good fantasy season. And I actually think that's super instructive with the Lions in particular, because I actually think they could take, like, all of this stuff could cause them to take a step back as a team, but they could actually then end up being, I won't say it's like a better environment for fantasy, but, you know, if the schedule is harder, if they're not leaning on teams with the run game quite as much, you know, because of the offensive line turnover. And again, just because they're not like blowing teams out of the water like they were at times last year, do they then have to throw the ball a little bit more? And does that become like actually a boost for a guy like a Jamison Williams or a Sam Laporta? You know, maybe some of these like not ancillary, but like the secondary wide receivers and tight ends in this environment here. Like, so again, it like one negative doesn't have to lead to another negative. It can actually lead to like a weird positive for fantasy. But that's like a little bit kind of esoteric and like very small lens. Like, I do want to just look at this big picture here, because I think the tough part with this conversation, Boone, is that we don't have a lot of examples of what this looks like in recent years, where a team loses an inner circle offensive coordinator, like one of the top 5 or so play callers in the game. Because for the most part, the top 5 play callers in the game are all head coaches, right? They're Sean McVay, they're Andy Reid, you know, even a guy like Matt LaFleur, like they're not going anywhere, right? So we don't have a lot of examples of this. I actually think the most recent example, or at least the best example in my mind, and people can correct me if they can find another one, I thought like the 2016 to 2017 Atlanta Falcons were a really good example of what we're looking at here to sort of table set what it looks like when you lose a top 5 play caller, because they had Kyle Shanahan that year. We know they went to the Super Bowl. We know what happened when they went to the Super Bowl, but they were an incredible offense that year in 2016. They ranked first in EPA per play, third in success rate, first in explosive play rate, and first in points per game. So obviously, Kyle Shanahan takes a job as the 49ers head coach. It was Steve Sarkisian that took over as the offensive coordinator in 2017 for the Falcons. It wasn't terrible. They were 6th in EPA per play, 3rd in success rate, 3rd in explosive play rate, but they were 13th in points per game. So that's sort of like when we're talking about Ben Johnson in particular leaving, we're looking at something like that, right? Where maybe this offense is still very good, but it's not one of the absolute best in the league, which, again, just to read off the metrics for the Lions last year, 3rd in EPA per play, 1st in success rate, 2nd in explosive play rate, and 1st in points per game.
Yeah, and you never know. We're going to talk about a team a little bit later, I think, that I had a lot of concerns about when they lost their coordinator last year and thought there would be a big drop-off. And then they managed to find another guy who stepped in and kept the offense just humming along. If not, maybe even made it a little bit better. So it's always possible. But again, for me, I always look at these things like they're each an individual data point. And if you just have one of them, maybe we can push it to the side. But when you have a bunch, that's when it starts to become a problem. And that's when I think there could be a little more predictability in that. So another thing I wanted to bring up here, and I don't see people talking about this enough, is their strength of schedule. And this is in real life and in fantasy. And I bring it up because it's top of mind. Like I said, I just wrote a bunch of strength of schedule stuff recently. I do it every year. And I really think this could be a problem for them. And if you want to go real life, I mean, Warren Sharp does a really good job with that. and he has them as, I believe, the third hardest schedule this year overall. If you want to look more at fantasy-wise and what I've done with it, last year had a pretty friendly string of opponents there. I mean, they were top 10 at 3 different positions when it comes to my strength of schedule matrix. And Jared Goff had a fantastic season. When I'm talking about Jared Goff hitting his ceiling, I think he might have hit it last year, right? QB 8 in fantasy points per game, had the 9th easiest schedule. And for me, I always say there's a chart if anybody checks out that matrix. You want to look at it, you want to look at the guys that are in green at the top and the guys that are in red at the bottom. The yellow in the middle, it's not really going to matter too much. So you focus on the tops and the bottom and the extremes there. And again, don't overweight that. It's just one more data point. It's good as like a tiebreaker or something to keep in mind. But now we switch to this year and things are going to be a lot different for him. He has the 5th toughest schedule for quarterbacks. The Lions running backs have the worst schedule fantasy-wise across the league for running backs. And then the other thing that factors into some of that, last year, okay, do we recall what happened with their schedule last year? They had this bizarre setup where they only had 3 outdoor games. They didn't have their first outdoor game until week 9. And let's look at Jared Goff a little bit here. I mean, he has like a 5 to 6 point difference in fantasy points per game when we're talking about indoor and outdoor games in his career. There is a serious difference there. So now we look at this season and man, 4 of their first 7 are going to be outside. 2 of their first 3 are going to be outside. I think they have 6 games outside in total. So that's yet another one. And okay, again, do we want to, maybe hedge a little bit and say, well, maybe this team's become a little more resilient over the last few years under Dan Campbell. They kind of have that attitude. Maybe, but now we're really stacking things up together here. I think the fact they're going from one of the easier schedules to now one of the tougher schedules, I think that is going to be a problem too.
I think this, again, it's such a good point because like it's one thing to focus on the Ben Johnson of it all and the changeover there. And we'll come back to that. But I love the point about there's multiple things happening here where it's not just, yes, you got turnover on the offensive line, which look, we in fantasy focus on Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs and all these playmakers and stuff like that. And yeah, again, Ben Johnson, a great play designer from a pass game standpoint. Like they're pass concepts and the way they're like the routes all work together and the spacing and how condensed it is and how they're able to attack all blades of grass. That's great. But this team is built on being badass up front, right? They're a physical run team. They're a run team that runs a lot of concepts. Like they pull guys, they'll pull Penei Sewell. They'll do all kinds of stuff like that. And when you lose Frank Ragnow in the middle, that's a huge part of it. And again, if this team is playing more outdoor games, and right, they play in Green Bay in week 1, they play in Baltimore in week 3, they play in Cincinnati in week 5, they play in Kansas City in week 6. That's not like not only are those games all outside, those are all pretty tough opponents too. In a whole nother lens of it as well. How many of those teams are they, and how many games this year are they just going to be able to lean on teams with that ground game? Which, like I said, maybe that does open up opportunities, more targets and things like that, more pass attempts for Jared Goff, more targets maybe for a Jameson Williams, or more targets maybe for an Amon-Ra St. Brown. But are those targets going to be as efficient? Because like we think about this from a fantasy perspective, like, oh yeah, we want quarterbacks who throw the ball a lot. You actually want quarterbacks to be efficient. You want them to be in positive game script because then they're not like throwing aggressively. They're not making mistakes. And again, this could all just be like a cascading effect here. So like you're right. It's not just the fact that they've lost a play caller, which is kind of the ethos of the show, but it's all these other things that are also in play with the Lions that make it like, again, nobody's adjusting for any of this. Boone, right? Like Jahmyr Gibbs is the running back 3. He's the 6th overall pick in drafts right now. St. Brown is wide receiver 6. He's the 9th overall pick in drafts right now. Jameson Williams, wide receiver 27. Dave Montgomery, running back 23. Sam Laporta, tight end 4. Jared Goff, QB 13. Like people are expecting this to be one of the best offenses in the league again and to provide a very fruitful fantasy environment. But there's a lot of things to consider here. And that's what we're doing here, right? We're take shopping. We're contrarian cornering this whole thing.
Yeah, and looking at some specific guys like you're doing there, Jared Goff, obviously, I've said my part about him. I have him further down my rankings than I think most people do. The other guy that I'm curious about that this could really impact is David Montgomery. And we've seen them have 2 very productive running backs for fantasy the last several seasons. But last year, we saw something kind of change there, right? Like David Montgomery, his carries per game went down by, I think, almost 2.5 carries per outing. That's pretty significant. Now, he made up for it with a little more receiving work, and obviously he always has the touchdown thing going on, and that kind of helps him fantasy-wise. But touchdowns can be volatile. And if we're talking about this team maybe not scoring as much or not being in those kind of positions as often, could he be the guy that really gets hurt here? He's somebody that I feel like every time I'm updating my projections and my rankings, I bump him down a little further. And right now I have him in that like fringe low end RB2 range kind of, but he could be like a high end RB3 or more of a touchdown or bust kind of flex play. I could see that totally happen if this offense takes a step back.
Right. He was running back 13 in points per game last year. He missed a few contests at the end of the season, which really then boosted Jahmyr Gibbs up. And man, as somebody that had Jahmyr Gibbs on a lot of fantasy teams last year, it wasn't the worst time in the world to have that happen. Right. You know, I never wish injuries on players, but obviously again, Jahmyr Gibbs really smoked at the end of the season. So Montgomery, though, I guess we're already kind of baking in a step back from him, but he is somebody, man, over the last few years, I've drafted a lot of because as much as we talk about, Montgomery misses time, Jahmyr Gibbs gets a big boost. The same is true for Montgomery, right? Like if Jahmyr Gibbs ever missed time, Montgomery would probably become an instant, top 12, top 10 weekly ranked back if this environment is still one of the best in fantasy, Justin. And I guess that's kind of the where we're at here. Like, what do we think of John Morton taking this team over? Because like John Morton's an interesting character, right? He actually he played in the CFL as a wide receiver. I don't know if you knew that, but he was a wide receiver. At least he was on the roster of the Argonauts. So like, there's that. But he actually has called plays in the NFL before. He was the offensive coordinator with the New York Jets in 2017. That was like an interesting offense because it was Josh McCown like throwing the ball all over the yard. He was Robbie Anderson at the time, I believe, but now Robbie Chosen averaged almost 15 yards per catch, scored 7 touchdowns. Jermaine Kearse went over 800 yards in that offense. Bryce Petty started 3 games. That's not great. And they ultimately were the 32nd ranked offense in success rate that year. So I don't know if we know anything about John Morton other than he has a really interesting background and that he's like been with Sean Payton for a while. He's kind of off the same tree as Ben Johnson, even spent time with the Lions as a senior offensive assistant in 2022. So this is the whole point of the show, right? Where throughout the course of the offseason, I've said like, I'm not too worried about the Lions because really, like, I think people are underrating how much of an offensive background Dan Campbell has. You know, he was a tight end in the NFL. He was an offensive coach under Sean Payton. Like, people think of him as just this, almost think of him as like a defensive coordinator because he's big and he has like that bravado. He doesn't look like the hotshot offensive coordinators, but he does have an offensive background. But again, I'm trying to check my priors here, Boone, where that's what I've said all offseason, but it is worth looking at the other side of it. And again, if these other factors also come to play and we just don't have that good of an offensive environment, we could be looking at like some potential misses here among Lions skill position players.
And maybe we should give Dan Campbell and company a little bit of credit because all along the way, people have doubted them, right? When he brought in a lot of coaches that were former players and didn't necessarily have like serious coaching backgrounds, people doubted that too. And it's worked out pretty well for him. So maybe he'll hit on another one here. But I just keep coming back to the Jared Goff aspect and what a tough act this is going to be to follow for Morton because Jared Goff had Sean McVay and Ben Johnson, who really got the most out of him in his career. And how on earth do you match what those guys have done, right? It's not impossible, but the odds of him coming anywhere close to what those two guys did with Jared Goff, I think that's a serious problem. And maybe you like Goff more than I do. We talked briefly about this at one point in our call a couple weeks ago that I think you had Jared Goff ranked pretty highly when you were looking at the top quarterbacks in the league. Again,
instant regret, by the way. Instant regret. That was one where I was like, maybe should have had Stafford over Goff. Like, if I was starting a franchise, would I really take Jared Goff over Matthew Stafford, even if for just this year? I don't know if I'd do that. So again, a little bit of regret on that one, but yes, nevertheless, continue.
Well, and Jared Goff, the fact that he was the QB8 in average fantasy points per game last year, and the type of quarterback that he is, right? We don't see a lot of quarterbacks who are pocket passers end up in that range unless they have huge touchdown totals and huge yardage totals. The rushing quarterbacks just crush those guys now, right? Like on average, you do not have many of those pocket passers end up in the top 10, the top 12. So I think with all these changes, it's going to be very difficult for Goff to get up there. And then that just trickles down to the entire offense.
So it sounds like Goff and Montgomery are the two guys that you're sort of backing away from in drafts. So, I mean, obviously it's very early, but like in rankings and projections and probably drafts this year, you're not going to be taking a lot of those guys, which, you know, if we're being fair, the market, like consensus ADP, has already knocked those guys back from their 2024 finishes. Is there a Lions player among the other guys that you're actually maybe gravitating to a little bit? Because we're talking about a lot of chaos here. Harder schedule, offensive line overhaul, maybe some change in the play calling and the structure of the offense with John Morton, although I do think they're going to try to keep it pretty similar. Is there a player that you think can benefit from that chaos, whether it's Gibbs, St. Brown, Laporta, Williams?
I don't think it's Laporta. I think I'm fine taking the other three where they're going. I'm not going to necessarily say their values, but I think they're appropriately priced. Laporta is the guy that I think we saw him take a bit of a step back last year, and part of it was injuries early in the season. Part of it is also that when Jameson Williams comes on, now you have another mouth to feed in that offense. And you know, tight ends, it's very, very difficult for them to be able to put up these huge seasons when they're not one of the top two target getters in the offense. And shout out to Andrew Cooper, Coupe Fiasco, Fantasy Alarm. He does a great job with his tight end analysis. And he pointed out something last year, 2 years ago, and it's fairly obvious. But again, unless you are one of the top two target getters in your offense, the odds of a tight end finishing as a top 10, top 12 guy are very, very slim. And a couple of years ago, every single guy that was in that top 12 was the number one or number two target in their offense. So I think Laporta, very, very talented. And I think around the league, there are a lot of tight ends that are very talented. And if they were in the right scenario, if they were the number one guy in the offense, or like the de facto number one receiver, or even the de facto number two receiver, I think they could put up big fantasy stats. And I look at Laporta like that, but in the range that he goes in now, I'm just not targeting him. I'd much rather have George Kittle, who I think has a shot to, you know, be that number one guy in the 49ers offense with some of the changes that they've had there. And I think in that range, you might as well just wait, because there's so many tight ends that kind of profile similarly to Laporta fantasy wise as you go down the list. So I don't think he is somebody that people should necessarily be targeting where he's going. I think his ADP needs to drop a little bit as well. But the other three guys that you mentioned, and Jameson Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jahmyr Gibbs, I think those guys are going to be fine. We might see very small declines if we see some sort of, you know, overall scenario, the entire offense coming down like we're saying, but I think those guys are going to be fine fantasy picks where they're going.
Yeah, it's a great point about Laporta in his rookie season was the locked in kind of number two target guy because they didn't have like a true difference maker at that wide receiver 2 spot. Jameson Williams, who, by the way, if I was to say a guy that, you know, because I'm with you, like I'm not going to rank St. Brown outside the top 10 receivers. You know, Jahmyr Gibbs, I think has to be right there in terms of like he just profiles really cleanly as a first round fantasy back. Maybe it doesn't work out, but the other guys in that range, like I'm not pushing any of the other players ahead of him, you know, just based on what we know right now. Like I'm not pushing Ashton Genty or Christian McCaffrey or any of those guys ahead of Jahmyr Gibbs. Like I think there's a bit of a difference there. But with Williams, he's the guy, if pressed for the question, like that I might actually end up drafting into a little bit here. He would be the guy because he did like usurp some of the Laporta stuff in terms of just the runway routes and things like that. He was really good against zone coverage in his reception perception sample last year, just shy of like 80%. And he was really good on these like in-breaking routes, which I think they will still try to hit. Now, I do think that he will always be a volatile guy. I think you kind of have to accept that if you're taking Jameson Williams. But if this is a team that is going to throw the ball more because they're in harder game scripts, they're not running the ball successfully because of the offensive line turnover, I do think that he's somebody who could see his target total on a weekly basis actually go up a little bit, which again, then it's still going to be a volatile projection because I think he is a volatile player, but the ceiling could be a little bit easier to hit or maybe just hit it more consistently than you did last season.
Yeah, you get there with volume instead of efficiency. And one thing or another thing that I'd be a little worried about with him is the offensive line issues. We've seen it in the past when there's struggles with the line. And like I've kind of suggested here with Jared Goff, if those offensive line struggles impact him, will we see Jameson Williams get as many deep shots in this offense?
Yeah.
Or will that start to be a problem? Will they start to drop off in those plays downfield? I think that could be an issue as well. But again, there are so many factors here that's really what pushes me towards looking at the Lions and being fairly concerned. And, some of the other teams we're going to talk about, I don't think they have as many issues, but the Lions just have so many things stacking up. And I think people need to talk about it more. And I think that's why this is such a great topic.
So, all right, before we toss to break and talk a few of the other teams here, just like scale wise, if I was to say scale of 1 to 10, like 1, you're actually not worried about this at all. And 10, like you're super concerned about it, because this is, again, we're sort of take shopping here. Like we're trying to figure out how much of this we really believe. Like how worried about the Lions are you from like a strictly a fantasy perspective? How concerned would you be heading into this year with all of the factors we laid out here?
Are we going to go decimals? Can I go 7.5? I think I feel like,
of course. Listen. Yeah. This podcast is all about decimals, a little bit of hedging, whatever. Okay, I'm not trying to get you like on social media threads like these 5 running backs to win your. No. You can hedge. You can decimal this thing as much as you want to, buddy.
I think 7.5 to 8. So for me, that's quite serious.
Pretty concerned.
Not a red alarm fire. We're not at a 9 or a 10, but 7, 8, I think it's going to be a problem for some of the pieces of this offense and for their overall stats, like you pointed out with the 49ers situation from years ago. I think that's going to be the issue. But again, this doesn't mean you're supposed to avoid every single Lions player. I think you made a case for some of those guys that they're going to be fine, but you need to be paying attention to this. This is something that, like you said, hasn't been talked about nearly enough. And I think it is a legit issue for them.
Yeah, just like bottom line perspective, no team scored more total fantasy points last year than the Detroit Lions. Like cumulative half PPR points, no team scored more. They could maybe be like 7, 8 this year. I think that's within the range of outcomes for them. And again, if that happens, somebody's going to be a little bit upset on a weekly basis and a season-long basis with these players. So definitely something to track. That's why I wanted to do this episode. And hey, first segment, you crushed it. So we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we're going to talk through the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, another team that lost their play calling offensive coordinator, right after this. All right, we're back. Let's talk through the 2025 Tampa Bay Buccaneers and whether we should be concerned that they lost Liam Cohen to the head coaching job to the Jacksonville Jaguars. People that listen to this show or listen to me on Football 301 know that I loved this Buccaneers offense last year. I thought it was like from week 1, man, you could see that, Liam Cohen's got the goods. And to be fair, you mentioned this earlier, Boone, that like when we all said it, I know I said it too last offseason, that when they lost Dave Canales, I was like, this could be a big problem, because Canales was very, very good as the OC in 2023. And Liam Cohen was a guy that he'd been kind of ping-ponging between the LA Rams and the University of Kentucky. And he was the OC, obviously didn't call plays because Sean McVay called plays. Of course, he always will for the Los Angeles Rams. But it was that 2022 season where they were pretty terrible. So you just kind of didn't really know what to do with that. But again, this was one of the best offenses in the league last year. They were 4th in EPA per play, 2nd in success rate, 4th in explosive play rate, 4th in total points per game. This was a top 5 offense by like any relevant measure. Now Cohen moves on. They promote from within. They get the passing game coordinator, Josh Grizzard, who was the pass game coordinator last year. He's got like an interesting background as well. Apparently he was very responsible for like 3rd down play calls with this team and just sort of designing that 3rd down package. But and they were awesome on 3rd down. But again, it's a different job going from pass game coordinator to the big chair now as the OC. What do we expect with this Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense? Like I said, Boone, I loved Liam Cohen's offense, and I still really like a lot of these players. I'm just not quite sure what to do with this whole thing here.
Well, I'm somebody that is going to be completely honest in my analysis. And I will say this is one that I normally would want to be a little bit worried about because the odds of hitting a third time on a really strong coordinator are probably pretty low. And yet, after what happened last year with Cohen coming in and doing a fantastic job with the offense, don't we have to kind of give them the benefit of the doubt because of the talent they have there, because of some of the veteran presence they have? You know, a lot of that infrastructure is still in place. A really good offensive line, I would say a top 10 offensive line in the league. I haven't done my offensive line rankings yet, but that's where I believe they're probably going to end up. I think there's just so much talent around them that they're going to be okay. Maybe we see a small drop off, but again, I want to be honest in the fact that my normal inclination would be this is going to be an issue. And yet at the same time, it's like they've earned enough credibility here that I think we have to give them a benefit of the doubt that they're going to be okay, that I'm only looking at maybe a small drop off and not a massive one.
Right. I think the way we can frame this is that it's totally possible. It's not improbable that they hit on the OC a third time in a row. This is really hard to do though, right? Like this is the pitfall of having the defensive head coach and you're constantly like, hey, listen, if you hit on an offensive coordinator, guess what? That guy is out the door. Because let me tell you what, if this offense puts up these metrics again or anything close to it this year, Josh Grizzard's going to be, I don't know, the Dolphins head coach next year or the Giants head coach or something like that, right? Like that's very possible. So, but it's possible. It's not impossible that they hit on offense coordinator again. But what I think I've said, and I, we can contrarian this all we want, but I think what is a 0% chance, Boone, is that they upgrade a third year in a row. Because I thought there was no shot they'd upgrade on Canales, but they did. Like Liam Cohen, again, I like Dave Canales' offense, but the run game was so much better. Just sort of like the fluidity of the pass game. It felt more dynamic, like so much more motion. Like they would just get guys wide ass open down the field. I mean, I don't know how much Jalen McMillan you watched last year, like in isolation, but so many of those plays were just, man, that was a really good Liam Cohen play design. And just nobody is covering that guy downfield. That's why he ends up being like a league winner for people last year down the stretch. So I think it's pretty unlikely that Grizzard comes in and is better than Liam Cohen, but he doesn't have to be better for this to still be one of the 10 best offenses in the NFL. Because as you mentioned, this is a team that has very good continuity, right? It's not like the Lions where they're losing like Hall of Fame level center, an all pro center or something like that. They brought everybody back on the offensive line. They just added to an offense that has great continuity by bringing Emeka Egbuka, first round wide receiver, into the mix here. So it's hard not to look at this group and think like, yeah, that is maybe an even bigger variable than the play caller loss is the continuity of this offense.
And the continuity, but they're also really building this up well. Like you have Baker Mayfield, who looks completely comfortable in his skin now, right? He's really stepped up and found that groove in Tampa. And I know it seems like the passing touchdown should probably regress after he threw for 41 last year, but they've done such a good job surrounding him with this high-end talent. Like obviously Mike Evans, he's great. How long can he keep this up? I don't know, but he's continuing to get it done. Chris Godwin, maybe we'll talk a bit about the injury and is he going to be ready at the start of the season? Is he going to be himself this year? If he is, one of the best receivers in the league, in my mind, though, we'll hear what you have to say because you are the receiver guru. And then to bring in Emeka Egbuka, who I think could be a fantastic fantasy player, but he's in this unfortunate situation where he's behind these two guys. But man, if one of these guys goes down, I think he's going to explode. Even if he's just out there with them, that is going to help this offense, maintain or be very, very close to what they've been in the past. So they've done a great job building it. Talked about the offensive line, but you have those veteran guys that you can trust. And then you have like these very young, exciting talents and Bucky Irving, the backfield, and Egbuka and, McMillan, who you mentioned, who I think it's an unfortunate situation for him where he's probably going to take a bit of a back seat here because you have three receivers that I think are going to overshadow him. So fantasy wise, he's not really someone I'm looking at, despite the fact that I agree with you. I really liked him last year. So it's too bad that he's going to end up being pushed down the depth chart a little bit here. But the situation in my mind is they've done enough to kind of improve the talent level, even that whatever happens with the coordinator situation, I don't think it's going to sewer this thing entirely.
Yeah, and the good news is too, if you want to draft Buccaneers players, it's not quite like the Lions where you've got to pay like sticker prices here. Like this Bucky Irving is going high, right? He's a running back 9. He's the 21st overall pick, and perhaps I guess with some of these passing game players, we're actually baking in some of the regression from the offensive coordinator change. Maybe, again, how just crowded this room is, some of the injuries, the age of these guys, because Mike Evans is wide receiver 20. Chris Godwin, wide receiver 31. Baker Mayfield is going rather high relative to quarterbacks, QB 7. I don't know if I'm drafting a ton of Baker Mayfield there just because I think you can get guys later on that project pretty similarly. Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver 49. Rashad White, running back 45. And then, McMillan, wide receiver 66. Not like a totally draftable player there. But if you want to get a piece of this Bucs offense, if you don't believe there's going to be a lot of Liam Cohen moving on regression here, it's not that hard to draft some of these players. Like, is there somebody on that list that you actually like taking a little bit where they're going? Because somebody's going to, in this offense, I feel like is going to be better than wide receiver 20 or whatever.
I mean, Chris Godwin, and we'll have to pay attention to the injury because he's coming off this dislocated ankle. He missed most of last season with it. And the quotes around it haven't necessarily been super confidence inducing, right? They haven't really come out and been like, oh yeah, he's going to be fine. And then on top of that, it's not just about what you're saying, it's about what you're doing. And the fact that you go out and spend a first round pick on a receiver, and a receiver that could kind of step into a lot of the slot stuff that Godwin does, that makes me a little concerned for Godwin's health this year. But when he's healthy, this guy, last season even, he was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game on average, right? He could be right up there. And that wasn't an outlier because he's done that before. If you go back 5 or 6 years ago, he was the wide receiver 2 in fantasy points per game. This guy is a really strong producer. He can do it again as long as he's healthy. So I think you're getting a great value on him, but that's one we're really going to have to watch for some updates when it comes to his health. I think because of the things we've already mentioned with Egbuka, I think all it takes is one injury to 2 older guys, one who's already potentially hurt, one who's going to be 32 in August. And Mike Evans, let's face it, I love the guy. He's been on so many of my fantasy teams. He's great, but that type of receiver, they don't normally age super well, right? We tend to see those kind of big guys that are contested catch guys. They kind of fall off a cliff at some point. And so I'm worried that's going to happen for Mike Evans, especially after he dealt with a soft tissue injury last year. You never want to hear about soft tissue injuries in receivers that are over 30. That is bad news. So hopefully he can stay healthy, but all it takes is an injury to one of those guys. And in my mind, Egbuka could be right up there where I have those 2 ranked, which is right around the low end wide receiver 2 range. So I think he is an incredible value as well.
Yeah, the more I've thought about it, the more I want to take Emeka Egbuka this year, especially if it's a best ball draft. And you don't have to set your lineups early on, or you don't have to hold him through, maybe when it is a crowded room. Because, my first thought when they take him in the first round is really a receiver? I don't get it. Is he going to end up being like a Roma Dunze type where he's just stuck behind these 2, or Jackson Smith and Jigba a couple of years ago where he's just stuck behind these 2 established, really, really good wide receivers? But then you think about it more, and especially the difference between this offensive environment in Tampa Bay, even if we're projecting a slight step back with Liam Cohen moving on, a lot better than what we were dealing with in Chicago last year. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, it's a veteran quarterback in Baker Mayfield as opposed to a rookie in Caleb Williams. But also, everybody stayed healthy and played all season last year in Chicago. Is that going to happen here this year? Because I love Chris Godwin. He has been a flag plant player for reception perception since his Penn State days. He was an awesome prospect. He's been an awesome pro. It's just every time when it feels like he's taken off, an injury has unfortunately just ruined the progress there. And that sucks. And man, I remember talking about it on the pod last year, that Godwin injury had me sick for probably a week afterwards. I just, that sucked. But we don't know what he's going to come back and as you mentioned, the team has been a little I wouldn't say cagey about it, but they just haven't been full-throated yeah, he's going to be ready for training camp. We're ready to rock with Chris Godwin. They did give him the contract extension. That obviously is a pretty big deal. And then Mike Evans, I don't want to be the one to say he's going to take a step back because he's just been so consistent. but it could happen. He's at that point in his career. So the more I thought about the Igbokwe pick from a real life perspective, the more it makes sense, because you don't want to have to be in the place you were last year where, and this is a testament to Liam Cohen, but you're having to put the offense together, like building around Cade Otton for 3 weeks. You don't want Jalen McMillan be your number one receiver. You don't want Sterling Shepard. I look a lot, and all respect to Sterling Shepard, one of my guys, but you don't want to be like building the offense around Sterling Shepard and Cade Otton here again. Okay. So I actually think Igbokwe at, like wide receiver 49, it might require some patience, but man, he could be like a second half darling this year. That wouldn't shock me at all.
Well, he's not going to have to deal with Shane Waldron like those other guys you mentioned, the other rookies who had to sit behind veterans. So that hopefully is a positive in his favor. I would venture to say, in terms of like the drafts that I've done so far, he might be the best value in my mind in terms of what he could be versus where he's going in drafts. The fact that he's a first round receiver, the fact that I really like what he could potentially be if he gets that opportunity. And I think there's a role to be had here. And you talked about McMillan last year, and it took some injuries then as well. But I think there's a role to be had for a third pass catcher in this offense. He's not going to hit his ceiling if everyone stays healthy, but he still could be valuable for you. He could potentially be a wide receiver 3 or flex play. And then you have that significant upside if one of those guys goes down. But the other thing is like this offense, and if we're talking about the offense as a whole, and one of the things that's great for them and them potentially continuing their success is how deep they are everywhere. Like the backfield you mentioned before, right? Like the backfield is so interesting because Bucky Irving came on, had a fantastic season last year, but they continue to talk up the other guys. And maybe that's just regular offseason talk. Coaches, I think people forget that like it's a coach's job to try to keep even the depth guys motivated, right? So you're not going to come out in April and May and be like, oh yeah, that guy, he's the third stringer. He's never going to play. Like
Sean Tucker, he's never seen the field. We don't care about Sean Tucker.
Yeah, we want to get these guys more involved. They're going to say that all the time. And last year, Rachaad White still had some involvement. I'm surprised that he's still around. I thought there was a chance that they'd move on from him this offseason because they seem to like Tucker so much. And Tucker had a lot of success when he got out there. But that's another spot fantasy-wise where I think Tucker goes so cheap. Like, keep him on your watch list. He's probably going to be somebody that we'll write about in waiver wire columns this year. You probably don't have to draft him, but if you're in a very, very deep league, when we're talking dynasty, this is a guy that I think people should be going out and trying to get for cheap, or just get him like thrown in as like the extra piece on a trade. The other managers are not going to care about Sean Tucker, I promise you. And yet that's the kind of guy in a deep dynasty league that I want to throw at the end of my bench and see if he gets an opportunity, either because of injuries, and knock on some wood here, we don't want to see any of those happen, but either some injuries happen that give him an opportunity in Tampa, or maybe eventually he gets a shot somewhere else. But when a guy has the success like he had last year in his limited opportunities, you have to take notice and you have to think ahead when it comes to dynasty, but also in redraft, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's just so many players on this offense that are worth keeping track of. Yeah, like Jalen McMillan is a guy that I think is really good as a wide receiver 3, like the number 3 receiver on a team's offense. But there's gonna be weeks where he pops a little bit just because this is a good environment. So I think it sounds like you and I are both still pretty confident. Like if we're putting it on the scale here, like I think I'm like maybe a 4 in terms of my concern level for this Buccaneers offense, which is tough because, again, I love Liam Cohen. I love what he did last year, but there's just so many other good things going on here. I'm not that concerned about the Buccaneers offense, again, especially Boone, because you don't have to draft these guys all that high right now.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I was going to say 3. So 3, 4. Yeah, certainly an area where I am not that concerned. And maybe we're giving them too much of the benefit of the doubt because they were able to replicate things last year. But I'm willing to go down that road again because of, all the continuity in that offense and because we've seen them do it before.
Well, either way, I'm glad we're coming out of this conversation being like draft Emeka Egbuka, because that I've been thinking more about it, and he's definitely somebody I want to be pretty high on. Like, there's a lot of scenarios where he's a very, very good pick this year. It would just require unfortunate circumstances, the guys ahead of him, which we do not wish for. But nevertheless, I think he was a really good prospect that was almost a little bit underrated in just how good he was. All right, we're going to take our final break. We come back, we're going to talk through one other offense that's under similar circumstances. The Philadelphia Eagles, might have heard they won the Super Bowl this year. We will talk about them on the other side of this break right after this. All right, we are back. Let's talk through the Philadelphia Eagles, Super Bowl champions at the present moment. They lost Kellen Moore, their offensive coordinator. They also promoted from within Kevin Patullo, who was the passing game coordinator for this team from 2021 to 2024. So he has been there for a minute. He's basically been there the entire Nick Sirianni era. Obviously was with Sirianni in Indianapolis as well. So this, again, Patullo has been there for a minute here. So there is some continuity here. This team is a little bit, they're a little bit weirder to talk about, Boone, than the other two that we just talked about, because I like Kellen Moore, but I don't think we'd consider him in the same tier of play caller as guys like Liam Cohen and Ben Johnson. That's just my personal opinion. And even last year, like this, and even this offense, like last season, they won the freaking Super Bowl. They have stars all over the place, but they weren't that good on offense last year. At least like they weren't at the level of Tampa Bay or Detroit. They were 7th in EPA per play. They were 14th in success rate. They were 13th in explosive play rate, and they were 6th in points per game. So I'm not saying they were a bad offense or Kellen Moore wasn't doing a good job, but every offense sort of just kind of turns into the same offense in Philadelphia there under Jalen Hurts. It's a little bit like the Russell Wilson effect in Seattle, where they keep cycling all these different coordinators, but they just do what makes the quarterback comfortable, which is not a bad thing at all. That's actually good coaching. However, we just saw this story play out a couple of years ago when Shane Steichen moves on in 2023. They lose Shane Steichen. They promote from within, then quarterback coach Brian Johnson, and that offense was pretty much a disaster in Philadelphia, and they had a very disappointing season. So it's a little bit different to talk about with this team. Where do you kind of come down on this Eagles offense with Kellen Moore out, Kevin Patullo getting promoted here?
This is another one where I'm not that worried about it. I'm, a little bit worried about the Super Bowl hangover. And I know that's a silly thing to bring up because it's not something that you can feel great about. But, every time I see a picture of Saquon Barkley out partying and everybody has drinks and everything around him, I go, okay, maybe I should be drafting a little more Will Shipley. But that being said, I'm not that worried about this offense. And like I said earlier, we were talking about, what you say versus what you do. Well, Scott Fishbowl started this week. The majority of the draft started this week. Mine did. And what did I do in the first 2 rounds? I was picking 7th. I got Saquon Barkley, who fell to me somehow there. And it's weird scoring in Scott Fishbowl, if anybody's wondering why he might fall to 7th. But I think he's more valuable than the 7th pick. And then what happened coming back around in the 2nd round? Jalen Hurts was there, and it's a super flex format. And I didn't necessarily expect that I was going to be taking 2 Eagles, but I ended up taking 2 Eagles to start my draft. So that tells you, I guess, how I feel about it, that I think this offense is going to continue to be fine. I'm not that worried about it. I like that you bring up the continuity aspect with Patullo. Because when you think about what happened with Brian Johnson, right, he hadn't been with the team that long. So maybe this is a good thing that this time around, it'll be a little bit better. But I also think maybe we remember the scenario a little different because fantasy-wise, they weren't terrible that year. Like the offense did have its issues. And we remember, I think probably conflate, like we talked about earlier, a team's record versus what's happening fantasy wise with them. And, some of the sideline turmoil that we see sometimes in those highlights of, AJ Brown and Jalen Hurts getting mad at each other or not talking on the sidelines or whatever. And we think back to how bad it was, but fantasy wise, it wasn't that bad. I mean, Hurts was right up there near the top of the league. I think he finished 2nd in fantasy points per game. DeAndre Swift was a low-end RB2, which for DeAndre Swift is not that bad. AJ Brown, wide receiver 11 in fantasy points per game. Devonta Smith, wide receiver 21. So these guys were kind of where they're going, and you just replace Swift with Saquon Barkley, and we know how that works out. So even if Barkley doesn't put up the kind of numbers that he put up last year, and I think that's the one area where it'd be very difficult for him to replicate the amazing season last year. And there's some spots where you could look at, all the times that he was tackled near the goal line. I think it was like 11 times that he was taken down near the goal line and then didn't score a touchdown. Some of that will switch around, but I look at this offense and I just look at the talent and those 4 guys in particular, and Hurts and Barkley and the 2 wideouts. And I just don't really see a scenario where these guys fail completely, barring some sort of injury striking.
No, it's a really good way of looking at it. I mean, the entire concept of this episode, like you see it on the lower third right now, like offenses that are too big to fail. The Eagles offense quite literally is too big to fail, right? Like it's too talented to fail because even that it's funny enough, like that 2023 offense, like they were 7th in EPA per play that year, success rate wise, they were 6th. They were actually better, like from a statistical standpoint than they were this past season. But I think we remember the Saquon Barkley season because that's the difference in putting DeAndre Swift, who's fine NFL running back, and Saquon Barkley behind this offensive line, this ecosystem. Obviously, that's the real difference maker there is that, that offense in Philadelphia that year, they were a good run team. Everybody knows that, but they were truly weaponized with Saquon Barkley back there. And all these guys too, like, they go early in drafts, right? So they're the team that you have to pay the most iron of the iron prices here to take these guys. Barkley is running back 2. Bijan Robinson, the only guy that's ranked ahead of him right now in consensus ADP. A.J. Brown, wide receiver 10. Jalen Hurts, QB 4. Devontae Smith, wide receiver 26. Dallas Goedert, like still tight end 13 hanging around there. Like these guys are going rather high, but as you mentioned, like that was a chaotic season in 2023. The whole team was disappointing. They were a little bit more disappointing on defense in 2023 than offense. That's totally fair to point out. Again, another coordinator change over there. Nevertheless, the offense, like they still scored fantasy points. And I feel like as long as all these guys are healthy and on the field, they'll score more fantasy points. And actually to that point, like if this team is, maybe it's a Super Bowl hangover, it's a slight step back for any reason, I actually think that might be more of a reason, Boone, to draft these wide receivers because A.J. Brown, like he's still a top 4, 3, 5, whatever you want to put it, wide receiver in the NFL. Devontae Smith is a total baller, one of, if not the very best number 2 receivers in the league. And if they're just in more like pass first game scripts, because they're not, leaning on teams with Saquon Barkley to the tune of 2,000 rushing yards, if A.J. Brown gets targets, he could be the number 1 receiver in fantasy, like period, point blank.
Yeah, I think there's been some talk about them trying to be a little more vertical with the offense this year. And maybe that's the receivers, not enjoying the fact that Saquon Barkley stole so many headlines from them last year or so many highlights and some of that spotlight. Or maybe it's just the fact that year over year things change, right? And like you said, they could have to throw more this time around. Either way, I think those guys are going to be fine. I think the continuity of this entire offense is going to be something that just keeps them chugging along because I'm pretty sure the only spot that's really up for grabs right now is the right guard job, I think. And when you look at that offensive line, I would argue they're still the best offensive line in the league, right? The other 4 guys are all Pro Bowlers. They're all really excellent players. So they figure out that one spot and away we go and they just keep rolling there. So I think these guys are all going to be good. The one, and I don't want to feel like, it seems like I'm picking on tight ends. We didn't talk about Cade Otton when we were talking about the Bucs, but I wouldn't have had great things to say about him fantasy wise either. But when you look at Dallas Goedert, he's in that group of tight ends going back to the idea that he's never going to be, barring a bunch of injuries, one of the number 1 or number 2 target getters in the offense. Last year, I mean, his 2 biggest games yardage wise last season, A.J. Brown was out. Smith missed part of one game and then completely missed the other. And yeah, Dallas Goedert had like a 170-yard week. And then I think the other one was like 62 yards or something like that. He's not the kind of guy that is going to go out there and make a difference for your fantasy team unless there's injuries to that receiving core. I used to always say this about Mike Gesicki when he was with the Dolphins, that you needed the receivers. You needed, who was there at the time? Devonta Parker or, some of those guys. You needed the starters to go down in order for Gesicki to have these big weeks. And he did have them sometimes. And maybe with the Bengals, it's the same scenario, right? If we see T. Higgins miss time,
I mean,
all of a
that's
sudden,
exactly what happened last year, right? Like,
low-end tight end 1. He's that kind of guy. I think Goddard's kind of in that category as well, where he needs somebody else to get injured in order for him to step up. And I don't want to bank on that. I don't think there's any reason to. And again, you don't have to pay up for him like you have to pay up for the other guys. But he's not someone that I'm really drafting at all. I have him kind of way down the tight end 2 ranks. And I don't think he's a guy that people need to worry that much about because there's such a big group in that area. And I think there's just other guys that have a better chance to come through with a season that could actually do something for your fantasy team, where Goedert is really just the injuries. That's the main path for him.
Yeah. I mean, number one, producer Colin, please make a note that we need to have like a tight end centric episode with Justin Boone here at some time, because I'm very curious about how you're actually ranking out this position, because people just always
promise there's tight ends I like. I promise.
Oh yeah, no, I know. I'm sure there are, but it's such a great point. Like, there's tight ends is difficult for a number of reasons. One, because as you keep bringing up, like if you're not the number one or number two target, you're kind of banged. And like, guess what? Most NFL offenses do not want to run through the tight end as their number one target getter. And that just, like conceptually, that is just the way most of the progressions go. You really have to go out of your way to put that guy in a bunch of different alignments, like the Chiefs did with Travis Kelce in his prime, obviously what the Raiders did with Brock Bowers last year. I will go to my grave saying that like Norv Turner and Scott Turner were doing some really fun stuff for the Raiders when it absolutely did not matter at all anymore, but they were doing some real fun stuff to get Brock Bowers in these matchups last year. And obviously he was the tight end one overall. He's currently the tight end one. So again, we'll do a tight end show at some point, but even with Dallas Goedert specifically, this is a guy they tried to move on from in the offseason. They tried to like put him on the trade block, and guess what? Nobody was buying, so they kind of adjust his contract. He's back here for another year, but that just sort of goes to show that this team, I think they want to funnel through the wide receivers. I even think they want something more from that wide receiver 3 position. I'm stupid enough to still think that like if you gave him targets, Jahan Dotson could do things for you. They also have like Anaya Smith. They also have Johnny Wilson on the roster. They have some interesting wideouts. They have like Terrace Marshall hanging out right now, and we'll see if he even makes the team. I think they're searching for some more wide receivers. So yeah, Goddard's a guy that, yeah, again, he's tight end 13. He's not even really drafted as a fantasy starter right now in traditional formats, but certainly there are other guys going behind him that I would rather take as well.
Yeah, and it's too bad because, again, I don't want to repeat what I said with Laporta. I don't think Goddard is necessarily the same talent as Laporta, but I think he is a guy that if you put him in the right scenario, I kind of hope this offseason that he was going to get traded or moved in some way to another squad, because I'd like to see him be a top 2 target getter in an offense. I think he's the kind of guy that could produce with that. He's just not going to see that in Philadelphia. The other thing that we haven't really mentioned, we talked about Barkley a bit and like that, monster workload that he had last year. Are you somebody who like worries a lot about that? I feel like I don't worry about that as much. Like people are very concerned that he had so many touches last year. Is this going to be a problem for him this season? Are you somebody that's worried about that?
I mean, it's weird to say like I'm not worried about it until I'm worried about it, if that makes any sense, because like, okay, if he goes out there and has another great season, nobody's going to ever bring up the touch count thing. But if he's hurt in like week 3 or something, there's, well, see, told you. Always happens to these guys with these monster workload. And look, like, yeah, he touched the ball a ton during the regular season, and then they went to the friggin' Super Bowl. Okay, so he had a lot of wear on the tires. I'm actually glad that he didn't push for that rushing record, just so that, hey, like at least he got 1 week off last year, right? But yeah, man, I mean, it's one of those things that is a data point. Now, is it gonna cause me to push Jahmyr Gibbs over him in rankings? Is it going to push Christian McCaffrey, who's the running back 4 in consensus ADP right now? Like, no, because again, there's concerns with those guys' profiles and things of that nature. But again, if he's hurt at some point this season, he has a slightly disappointing year, we'll all like point to that as the big cause of it, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I will say, as much as I haven't really been scared to draft Barkley like I just did in Scott Fishbowl, when it comes to Dynasty, I've been getting a lot of Will Shipley. I have been every rookie draft when I was making moves on the draft board, I'd always try to see who the Will Shipley manager was and try to go get him tossed in a deal. I think Shipley would be the guy, even though A.J. Dillon probably would get some work in that scenario. It probably wouldn't just be, Shipley stepping right in, but there's been a lot of positive buzz about Shipley. I think they really like him. I think there's a chance he even could get some work this year as like a change of pace guy if they are kind of want to take a little bit away from Barkley. There's been, some reports and some quotes that came out of OTAs that maybe Shipley could be a little more involved this year. But he's somebody that I like. If Barkley goes down, I think Shipley's going to be somebody that you want to have for fantasy. You could put up decent stats in this offense, not Barkley stats, but still be a pretty good fantasy starter for you in that scenario.
My only take on the Eagles backup running back situation, and maybe they can put this up in post. I saw A.J. Dillon post a cool picture of himself in full American flag overalls and like drinking a spotted cow and working the grill on 4th of July. And I was like, he's probably a cool guy to hang out with, but I don't know if that's like what we want in our backup running back for the Philadelphia Eagles standpoint. So I'm glad you brought, that's my only take on the Eagles back quarterback situation. So Justin Boone is doing a lot more work than me in that regard. So it sounds like we're both pretty low in terms of the concern meter here. I'd honestly put it at like a 1 or like a 1.5 in terms of how worried I'd be about this.
I was going to say 2. Yeah, not very concerned. I think other than Goddard, I think these guys are going to be just fine.
All right, Justin. Well, this was a hell of a debut episode by you. That is going to do it for us today. Tell the people, I know you said a bunch of stuff up top that you're working on. Just give us a little review on what you've got coming on the site this week.
Yeah, so hopefully later today, my rankings have been up on our group rankings page, but I'm going to have solo rankings pages where this time around now I'm going to have like little blurbs kind of about the latest news and some of the changes that I've made in the rankings recently, and I'm going to keep changing that as we go. So those are hopefully going to go up later today. The dynasty trade value charts, like I said, that I've been getting so many messages about, and people, someone told me that they didn't know what to do without those when they were trying to make trades and do the rookie drafts and stuff. So don't worry, they are coming this week. Lots of changes. It has been a while. It felt weird for me too, not updating them, but those are going to be coming later this week as well. And then we'll get into, a lot of the usual kind of preseason content of breakouts and busts and sleepers and all that sort of stuff, and reacting to, all the news that we start to get, because we're only a couple weeks away here from everybody being in training camp, which is like one of the best times of the year.
Yeah, it is coming. Things are happening. So for the people that have wanted to check out all your content during your brief time, I mean, like really, it was pretty brief in terms of your time not publishing content. But hey, man, that's a testament again to Justin's work ethic and how much people are into it. So listen, a lot of good stuff coming from Justin on the site. If you go to the rankings page, you can just scroll right on past my column and go right to Justin Boone's column. I'm going to say that now, and I'm going to probably say it throughout the course of the entire season. That is for sure. We're excited to have Justin back on the pod. Expect more dynasty content with him as well, as he mentioned with the trade charts. But he also is going to be back on the pod next week. We got a fun episode coming up there. But before that, this Thursday, we will be back with Sharp Football's Rich Rebar. You know him, you love him, Lord Reeves himself. He's going to join the show, and we're going to take a contrarian corner look at what if we're wrong about our wide receiver rankings. So I'm excited about that. Until then, we are out.